Hello, hello, hello. Hi.
Hey, Jen.
Hi,
How are
Nadine.
you?
I'm good. How about you?
I am good. Now I got my hoodie on.
I know. Okay. I wonder how many people are wearing a hoodie
Today?
right now today. But yeah, we get cold easily, and today at the office is kind of cold, so
Yes.
we can't say the same outside.
Yes, we did not go out in public with our hoodies on.
Yeah, yeah, we respect that boundary. Welcome everyone to another Askable Live, the show where we talk about all things sex ed, community, and how we can support one another and support our youth. Um, but before we actually start to with our live, we want to do our usual acknowledgments and recognitions, and that is that Black Lives Matter today and always. We've been saying it for quite a while. We'll continue
Yes,
until
we will keep on saying it.
until everyone can get uh, into until everyone can finally understand why we are keep saying Black
Saying it.
Lives Matter.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think it's important not only to say it but also to believe it, and also to continue fighting for what we believe in, and that is that you know the most vulnerable need to be uplifted and need to have their voice be heard.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Yeah. Voices that have been silenced for way, 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 way too long need to be heard.
exactly. So who are these people that are talking here? My name is Jonathan. I use he, him, and ill pronouns, and I'm the Youth and Health Resource Center Coordinator for Berks Matters. And with me,
And my name is Nadine, and I use they and their pronouns, and I am the community liaison with Berks Teens Matters.
and with schools across Berks County and kind of like the states starting or about to start after the summer break, we thought it might be a good idea to focus today's conversation on starting strong.
Yes, and it's funny that you should mention starting strong, Jonathan, because just yesterday, when you were feeling a little under the weather and not feeling so strong, I imagine, I was busy getting a little obsessed with a website that recently came to my attention. I think I had discovered it some years back now, but had totally forgotten about it. Would you like to guess what the name of it might be?
um, I'm guessing that it has to be with starting and strong.
Yes, actually, it is Start Strong. And that was the name of, and actually, then today we discovered that there were more sites about
Yeah,
starting strong.
yeah,
But this particular site that I stumbled upon yesterday was Start Strong. And I thought, like, in two simple words, it really encapsulates what they are about. And like us, their main focus was on healthy relationships. So it's not like I was just like cruising around the web doing whatever I felt like. It was actually work related and relevant to what we do. And a lot of the resources that they make available in their community. The particular site that I was at was Start Strong Boston.
hmm
So it really aligns very much with the resources that we share. I would say if there's any kind of a difference between us and them, it's that their primary emphasis was on preventing teen dating violence and healthy relationships, where our primary focus, as everybody who's tuned in previously knows, is on healthy sexuality. And we understand that that is foundational to healthy relationships because, really, by definition, healthy relationships are violence free relationships.
hmm
So, kind of like I said, even though there may be many miles, probably in the neighborhood of 350 miles, literally, between us and the folks in Boston, what we're about is very similar in terms of starting strong.
And we clearly don't live in Boston, although we're using hoodies. Um, and you also said that there's different sites in different places, and I think there's Atlanta, there's many different places about I think it's Atlanta, Austin, Los Angeles, Indianapolis, Wichita, the Bronx, for example.
Yeah.
And I found it very interesting that well, you said that you knew about them, but
I knew, but I forgot.
um, and what do they do, or what resources they have?
Well, the one area that I thought was really worth exploring is they have created a lot of what their resources are youth-driven resources and information, which I thought was amazing. And they have like social media, and they have some really great public service announcements on YouTube. But since this is an Askable adult show, I thought it might be a good idea to focus on the resources that they have for adults. So that's where I thought we should begin. But they have great stuff, and we're just talking about the Boston one at the moment. Like you said, there are many others, and each program is kind of geared toward the community that they are in.
In about all the resources that you found, at least in the Boston chapter, which one caught more your attention?
Well, they had this nice little resource for adults that was about supporting your teen.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that drew me into it was that it starts out with the very same kind of thing that we often suggest, which is remember when. Like remember when you were a teen, remember your first partner, remember your first kiss, and even remember your first breakup. But for an adult to be an Askable adult, before you start trying to interact with young people around some of these topics that can be complex, first take a moment to go inward and reflect and think back and remember when you were living through that time of your life.
This, I don't know, but this kind of sounds like the our Askable adult training. Do you think is the same?
Well, it has certainly has a very similar theme to it. But the one thing that they did that was different that we've never done, but I really did like, is within that remembering when and trying to think back on our own teenage experiences, they broke down into 3 different areas with some specific points. And so as you're remembering what it was like to be an adolescent, then there was also like a little bit of education about adolescent brain development, adultism, which I think we talked about a little bit last week and might talk about more in the future. And then the adult role that's associated with the whole concept of having conversations with young people, really about any topic. But of course, both we and the folks at Start Strong are focusing on healthy relationships. So.
And before we kind of like go through, because I want to learn a little bit more about the adolescent brain development, autism. Something that I think is very important to know about, for example, the Askable adult training and the resources that that Start Strong provides. That tends to be remember when. You don't need a training to do this. This is something that we all can do in our spare time, when we can reflect on on our lives. Parents, adults in general, remember when you were a kid, and the adults around around you criticize your taste in music, or your tasting in TV, or your taste in video games, or on
The way
people,
you're dressing.
the way you dress, exactly, your clothes, your even your choice, your choices, and your every pretty much everything about you. um and while you're doing that reflection, think, have I done this? Is this something that I've you know taken any part on now that I'm an adult? And that's where the adultism comes in, because this is something that kind of just like comes with time, because we tend to think that we know better because we're adults, we already went through it. It's like, oh, stop crying about this, because that's not important. Look at me, I had my heart broken a couple of times and I'm still here. But it happened and it was valid, during that moment for you.
Mhm.
So why will we put that shame, that stigma, that why would we downplay the emotions that teens are going through? So that's why it's so important to remember think about your youth, go back in time in your mind, and compare how were you treated and how you are treating the youth in your life today. Even if you say, oh, but the music wasn't as vulgar, or the music, well, remember, just go back. Maybe it wasn't as explicit, but it was there. Maybe you weren't listening to that. But you know history tends to repeat itself. It's just sometimes it doesn't, we don't see the connection. Maybe because we passed that moment in our lives, but that doesn't mean that it didn't happen.
Yep, that's very correct, Jonathan. I appreciate that.
So,
Um,
talking about adolescent
yeah.
brain development.
Yeah, well, and it ties right back into what you're saying, because these three things, the brain development, the adultism, and what the adult role really is or can be at its best, are all interconnected. And so really, I think with the adolescent brain development, and they don't get real deep into it in their information, but they just give us enough to um, I think it is a reminder in some ways, and because we've all lived through it, and so we all kind of know if we can take ourselves back to that point in our lives, but we might not know that, scientifically, this is the case as well, that a young person's brain functions a bit differently than adults when it comes to having conversations around relationships and things that are intense and meaningful. The emotional part of their brains is where they're thinking from a lot more. And I think that we can all relate to that. I mean, even as adults, we know what it's like to be lost in an emotional part of our brains when we get involved in a new relationship, or some other thing that has intense emotions associated with it, how we can get kind of stuck in that part of our brains. And for teens, that's the part that they're most involved in at that particular point in time. They might get, for us, it might, that overwhelming emotion, brain function might not last as long, or it might not be quite as dominant. But just to have that appreciation and operating out of that with the development of the brain is an important piece of the brain development. And learning that, at the time, something feels like in the moment is like the most important thing, as opposed to being able to think into the future. We need to acknowledge that and affirm that, and meet teens where they are at with that piece of their development. I do think that a lot of times, as adults, we sometimes want to protect teens rather than actually let them go through the developmental challenges that they're facing. And being an askable adult is really about not protecting, but supporting through that developmental process. We also need to recognize that they're exploring their gender identity, their presentation, their sexuality, and they need space to be able to do that. And we as adults are the people that can create or help to create that safe space so they can do that exploration, and test out kind of separating from their families and being more independent and all those things that go with maturing. But if we don't let them practice it and test it and explore and make space for that, then their development is not going to be as positive.
Yep. In when does the adultism comes in? Because I'm guessing that at some point of the adolescent brain development and adults not necessarily understanding what is happening.
Yeah. Well, sometimes, I think sometimes too, like we as adults, we don't maybe take the time to consciously reflect on what it was like to be teens, but those memories are there. And so being present with teens when they're going through some of their struggles, whether it's the good times or the bad times and the highs and the lows and the emotional learning process. I think sometimes we want to protect them, as I said before, and sometimes we really want to protect ourselves. We don't want to go back there and think about that. And that, I think, is part of where the adultism comes in, because we want to, I think, in part, trying to be protective, we sometimes tend to maybe discount what teens are going through rather than acknowledge the validity of what they're really feeling and experiencing. And the bottom line is, when it comes to discounting and not affirming the experience, both feelings and lived experience that teens are having, do not do that. Mm-hmm. I would say that in bold and capital letters, underlined, maybe even highlighted. Do not do that. Instead, what we really need to do is not try to control their lives, not try to diminish what they're experiencing, but remind them that they actually really have control in many ways, even though it might not feel like to them. There are a lot of ways in which they do have control over their decisions and their choices, and help them think about that. Remind them of the control that they do have and help them brainstorm steps that they might be able to take to move through whatever it might be that they're going through.
And I will also add that just because we're saying do not try to control them or to control their lives, that doesn't mean that we are saying not to hold them accountable by their actions.
Correct.
Because one thing is to tell them don't do this, and another one is like, well, let's talk about it. If it happens, that was your decision. You will have to deal with that. I'll be here to support you, but I just need you to know that these are my thoughts. Take it or leave it.
Right.
But this is all part of this bigger process of having conversations, having difficult conversations with the teens in our lives. Because if we wait to the last possible moment, we may have that feeling of trying to control because we want to protect. But having set a foundation, we should have at least somewhere to have a certain type of peace and be at ease, because they know that they have someone to come to if it's something happening in their lives that needs to be taken out. So that goes into the adult roles.
Yes.
That every adult has, regardless of being a parent or not, right, Nadine?
Yes. every adult has a role in the lives of young people in our community. And there are some tips. Before I jump into them, let me just go back to what you were saying. It's when we say to not tell them what to do and things like that, we're not saying to not hold them accountable. And we're not saying don't have any boundaries and don't have any limits, because real life includes boundaries and limits for all of us, regardless of our age. We're simply saying that as people are moving through adolescence, they're developing adults. And as developing adults, they need more and more space, little by little. So those boundaries and limits need to be expanded in order for their development to happen in a healthy kind of way, so that they can be the responsible, thriving adults in healthy relationships that we want them to become.
It takes time. That goes also before it to the adolescent brain development. It may take time, and that's okay. They're learning, they're developing, they're absorbing different experiences and knowledge. It's, clashes are bound to happen.
Exactly.
and we should welcome them, but at the same time, having boundaries, having accountability, having respect and empathy towards what both the adult and the teen or the youth is going through.
Yes. And I like that you say we should welcome those challenges. Every day we might not feel like that's what we want to do, but it is a good sign that things are developing. And not every person develops, just like some people, their height comes sooner than others, and some people, like facial hair, comes sooner than others. Breast development, all those physical things, the same thing happens mentally and emotionally, that we develop at slightly different levels. So it's really important to keep those communications open, not shutting them down by kind of taking over and not giving the young person the opportunity to make decisions and choices and that kind of thing. And so the adult role really is to empathize, to meet the teen or meet the other person where they are at. So when they're expressing their feelings, we might want to state those feelings back to them, what we're hearing them, what we think we're hearing them say about how they're feeling. Empathize that way, put ourselves in their shoes, ask questions, rather than think that because we're the adults, we're supposed to have all the answers. Our role is to really ask questions, and not in a way that's like accusatory or anything like that. Like, well, if a young person is exploring something around sexuality, don't jump to conclusions about their gender identity or orientation or their sexual behaviors, but ask questions in a way that's like exploring to understand, that you want to understand where they're at and where they're coming from with things. And then I say, like, empower them. The folks at Start Strong say empower them. And I think that what I mean by that is to acknowledge the power that they do have, by supporting them to dig a little bit deeper in their learning process and in their thinking process, giving them the space to be able to talk things through out loud, to help their thinking process and to then inform their decision-making process.
Exactly. So if you have any other questions, if you would like to see all the resources, we encourage you to check Start Strong from the Boston Public Health Commission. The link is on the post. Yes, on the post. So I made it easier.
You would know, Jonathan. You would know. I would not, but you would know.
And yeah, teens are complicated because they're human. Adults are really complicated because they are human. We just need to have a little bit of more empathy, have a little bit more of openness to talk, to have conversations, to be there for one another,
and to listen.
and to listen. And I think that's the most important part, is listening, because anyone can talk, but not many of us can actually listen. And with that, I think we will leave you until next week in another Ask About Adults live every Tuesday at 5:30. And oh my God, next week school starts. Ah!
Yeah, for some folks around the county, it's already started, but yeah,
Oh
here
my
in
God.
Reading, and for people that are going to be sitting in their health resource center at Reading High School next week.
I wonder who that is. It's me. Check it out.
Yeah, check it out. Do check it out.
So everyone have a great week, and we'll see you next week on a Tuesday on another Ask About Adults live.
Yes.
Bye.
Bye-bye.